Good morning, everybody. Welcome along to the Donington Park Grand Prix circuit, the first of two visits here to the East Midlands for the Intelligent Money British GT Championship. A 3-hour race, their second of the season, coming up later on this afternoon, full of strategy, good side-by-side racing, and possibly a change in the weather, although the sun is starting now to break through the clouds. It was a little bit overcast and chilly this morning, but the track temperature, you can see, rising into the 20s now and getting up towards the point at which it was for qualifying yesterday afternoon. Spectators continuing to pour into the circuit. We're expecting a healthy crowd here for round number 4 of the British GT Championship. Andy McEwen up here in the commentary box, and alongside me, delighted to have for the first time this year, a voice very familiar to any regular British GT viewers, factory McLaren driver, podium finisher last time in the British GT Championship at Silverstone as well, Joe Osborne. And Joe, Donington Park, one of my favourite circuits and one I know you enjoy as well.
Yep, definitely. I think it's the circuit in the UK that most drivers would call their favourites for many reasons. When you see the circuit map here, you get an appreciation, Sector 1 and 2, how much it flows, and also when you add in the topography, easy for me to say that the up and down nature of it really makes it a difficult first sector through the Craners. And then the third sector is very technical, very tight, but really allows for a lot of overtaking, but does bunch these cars up. And I think that's probably what I'm most excited and fearful in equal measure about, is that Sector 3, 3 hours of racing around Donington for the first part we've ever done with British GT. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. We had 3 hours at Silverstone, of course, for the Silverstone 500 a couple of weeks ago, but Donington, a completely different challenge, and I think we'll get into the strategy once we get into the race, but we might see teams trying a few different things, I reckon. At Silverstone, it's a lot easier to overtake, I would say, Joe. So if you're stuck in traffic, there's half a chance that your driver's going to be able to do something about that. Here at Donington, though, might we see some teams pitting early, pitting out of sequence, because you can pit more or less when you like, as long as you do it 3 times.
Yep, you've nailed it. Not only are you clever, you've got the strategy brain as well. So you've basically got one too many pit stops in the 3-hour race. You could do it on 2 pit stops with the fuel, that would be enough, but there's an extra third one. So that opens up the window massively. You basically could stop after 5 minutes of running at the start of the race and still get to the end quite easily. So the time loss here, like you said, with the traffic is going to be big. And at Silverstone, really, from my experience, my worst lap was probably 2.5 seconds off my best because of traffic. I think you could lose that in Sector 3 alone here with a couple of GT4 cars. So we're actually riding into Sector 3 here with Nick Halstead, still warming the tyres up a little bit, but you'll see this far chicane, big tyre stack on the left. You need to be as close as you can to that, cut the right as much as you can without getting done for track limits. Dive down the hill, 4th gear, all the way down to 1st gear here, most probably if the tyres have got the grip. Rotate the car in, get rid of the steering lock, full throttle, and go. You'll see a blue flashing light on the dash of the McLaren. That's traction control active, so the car doesn't spin out. Last corner, similar to the previous hairpin, but now left-hander. Hook it in, you can get on that apex curve where you see the mud, unwind the lock, use the exit curb, and off you go. You get a little chance to relax, but then the lap starts again, and it's going to be coming at you fast. Into Redgate, on the brakes, a good car, you can hold 4th, may need 3rd on used tyres, 2nd, little bit wide, and then off we go. And now that time he lost at turn 1 is going to bleed all the way down the Craners. Should be flat, bring it back to the right. The left is there, it's out of view until you're already on top. Another little break into the old hairpin, clobber the curb. On the left we have these sensors which monitor the track limits, you have to be careful. Through Starkeys, up the rise, coming up to McLean's, you need to stay to the left, but the car wants to go to the right. Trail the brake in, get it in and go. And again, there's an expansive runoff that you're not allowed to use. If it's green, it's illegal. Maybe it should be painted red for a bit more logic. Over into Coppice, and again, this corner goes on and on, all the way down the back straight here to Donington. And that looks like a pretty steady lap for the warm-up, 1 minute 36. And then we're going to be on the brakes, and you can see that closing gap in front of that Toyota Supra GT4. That car will be driven on its limit itself, but naturally is that sort of 8 to 9 seconds slower around here. So you'll see under the braking the car can stop better. That's because of its bigger tyres, because of its aerodynamics, lighter, more refined, and then you'll see the power element of it out of the corner. That Supra will be full power, but you see a deficit of 20 k's, and actually we flick to the Supra and you see the McLaren blasting past him in that driver window. Looks like here with Jordan Collard was setting up a lap into the last corner, as we see McLaren showing off its pretty innovative door mechanism. And Funnily enough, after Silverstone on my podium, where I was obviously so proud of myself, I opened my door on the in-lap to wave and say thanks to all my fans, and the door actually closes itself when you get to about 140 kilometres an hour. So the 76 car there, if we get a bit more speed, I think the door will be self-closing.
Not the first time we've seen that car on track not looking quite as it should, because of course that's the car that had the rear wing damage at the start of the Silverstone race, and Mia Fluid did basically her whole first stint with essentially no rear wing, which, I mean, she wasn't the fastest car on track by any means, but she kept it on the track, which was impressive enough. In the pit lane here, we're seeing the one of the two Ram Racing Mercedes. This is the number 15 car. It's the sister car that leads the championship. Driver wants to go, team telling him not to because the Enduro McLaren was coming down the hill, but this car is the car which jointly leads the championship. Ian Loggy, who is aboard the number 6 Ram Racing Mercedes now, having got himself a race win at Alton Park along with a second in race 1, is tied for the championship lead with Sean Balfe and Adam Carroll in the Audi. Now the Audi at Donington at least doesn't quite seem to have the ultimate pace that the Mercedes has, so this is important the weekend, I think, for Loggy to try and bank some more points and actually build a bit of a cushion at the front of the championship standings.
Yeah, definitely. I think Loggy's got a little bit of a challenge this year in terms of driving with two different co-drivers. I appreciate that doesn't change how he drives, but he will need coaching from his pro driver, be it Jules Gounon or Callum McLeod, so it's going to be difficult in that regard. So we've got the Ginetta here of Joe Wheeler. He actually missed all the testing in the week due to school commitments, which sounds a bit perverse to say. So he's going to have to get up to speed quickly. So his first time in the car was qualifying yesterday, which is probably not the ideal preparation in all fairness.
No, I think we said in qualifying yesterday that he hadn't done any pre-event testing. I didn't realise he didn't rock up to Donington Park until about lunchtime yesterday. So yeah, no free practice. Got his laps in qualifying, so he's eligible to race. But I mean, not the easiest thing to do to jump into a GT4 car with zero testing on the Grand Prix circuit. He's raced on the national layout here at Donington before, but never the full Grand Prix layout. So going to be fascinating to see how he goes on. We believe he's going to do the whole warm-up session because, quite frankly, even 15 minutes of track time is going to serve him pretty well. Phil Keane into the pit lane. Phil Keane is the lap record holder. You won't be shocked to hear here at Donington Park, although very likely that we'll see lap records broken. The qualifying lap record has been broken in GT3 at every round so far this season, and I'm sure we'll see the same thing in the race later on today. Phil Keane, for whatever reason, at WPI Motorsport, not having the best of times, yet to win a race this year, but of course at Barwell, their Lamborghinis have been going strong. This was the car, the number 1 car, number 72 car, I should say, which won last time out at Silverstone.
Yeah, really strong pairing of Sandy Mitchell and Adam Ballon, and then Barwell know that Lamborghini so well also. It's a real good advantage as we go on board with another GT3, this time the Mercedes of Lewis Williamson. So it'll be interesting to see if we can see any major differences. The McLaren obviously know pretty well, so easy to talk about, but the Mercedes front engine being the biggest difference to the McLaren, so that should give the car a little bit more grip on corner entry because of the weight over the front axle, but then on the exit it normally struggles to traction a little bit more. If you see him going past the Ginetta really helping him there by moving over to the right early and showing him where he wants to go. You can hear that V8 on the downshift singing lovely. So it's nice to have this diversity of cars, and actually you see him coming into the pit entry. Pit entry is really difficult here. There's not a white blend line, so there isn't a rule that you have to be over to the left by X amount. So it's actually as fast as you can attack it without hitting the pit wall, essentially, which is kind of a bit of a natural limiter.
Yes, and time that can be gained on the way into the pit lane is important. We have minimum pit stop times once you're past that pit entry line, but getting into the pits, yeah, you want to do that as quickly as possible without speeding as you cross that line. So in comes Lewis Williamson then, a car that we did not see a lot of at Silverstone last time out, the 2Cs Motorsport Mercedes, because it tangled with the Team ABBA Racing Mercedes, and this Mercedes wasn't a great first few laps at Silverstone for Mercedes. Those 3 cars crashed at Club, and then Chris Froggatt had a spin as well halfway around the lap later on, so they'll be hoping for a cleaner start today, that is for sure, as the number 6 car makes its way down into the chicane. I wince every time we ride on board with the car through here, because those yellow bits that are supposed to stop them corner cutting don't stop them corner cutting. They insist on driving over them at high speed, and the punishment that the suspension and the tyres and the drive shafts go through, it doesn't really bear thinking about.
No, and actually I went and watched there yesterday trackside, and you're literally only 10 metres away, so you get a really good appreciation of one of the speed, but that energy you're talking about. And the problem is, as a driver, is risk versus reward. The risk there is that you hit it and it damages the car. not only is from a cost perspective, but obviously potentially a DNF, but the reward of the pace is worth it, because someone will get to the end of the race every lap smashing that yellow curb without a failure. So if you don't do it, you're not going to win the race. So your hand is called by the sort of durability of these modern GT cars.
Team Parker Racing here, their GT3 Porsche making its way through that chicane we were just discussing. They were quick in practice yesterday, but will start only 11th on the grid for the 3 hours of racing later on. Porsche, a car that you'd imagine will go well here at Donington Park. We commented in qualifying yesterday that it works particularly well through this tight final sector, the rear-engined Porsche with that incredible traction off the low-speed corners. The 66 car at the moment being driven by Nick Jones, the AM driver, and of course the AM drivers will be starting the race. So again, makes sense in a way for them to get as much track time in this morning warm-up session as they can. It counts for nothing, no points available for going quickly in this session. It is just a chance to shake down the cars, get some pit stop practice in, and just double check that the car is still doing everything today that you want it to, as indeed it hopefully was for the pair of very competitive qualifying sessions that we had yesterday. And Joe, they gave us an intriguing grid. We perhaps were able to predict more or less who was going to be on the pace, but in both classes, especially GT3, very, very little to choose between the qualifying times.
Yeah, and amazingly so, very little in the AM session. We always see a bigger disparity of the AMs, just purely on this skill base that they've got. We're used to the pros being tenths of a second apart, but the AMs were so tight, which led to such a good qualifying. So the Enduro car came out on top and looked very strong, but there's, for me, 6 cars behind it that have all got a decent chance today. The Bentley's an outside favourite, just sneaking into the top 10 of that qualifying session, but that car's a great race car, and for the main reason its straight line speed is so high. Might not be the fastest in the corner, but down that straight where you can overtake other cars, it is at the top of the speed traps, which is lucky when it's the size of a boat.
And it sounds good as well. I realise that's not performance enhancing, but the fact that it makes the noise that it does, this Bentley, makes it a real fan favourite. And it's great that we still have Bentley represented on the grid, thanks to SRO Motorsports, which was a bit of a curveball actually, hearing SRO, who have been traditionally associated with Ginetta, instead choosing to run a Bentley Continental GT3, but Mark Sansom, who I think is at the wheel of the number 3 car now, yes he is, moving up from the Ginetta ranks, sharing the car with Will Tregurtha, another ex-Ginetta front runner, and that car we saw Bentley win here, of course, in the wet a couple of years ago. They could, as Joe said, perhaps be an outside bet for the race victory later on. There goes Joe Wheeler. I thought I heard a screech of tyres, and it was the number 4 2Cs Motorsport car. James Cottingham has just jumped on board, the AM driver. We've seen some good things out of James on his appearances in British GT before. A quick driver, no doubt, and again, he's got the car to do the job this weekend. What do you think? Podium contender perhaps today?
Yeah, definitely. Not if he drives like this. So through the old hairpin, just a bit too much curb. You hear the right-hand side of the car bottom out. Basically, that just takes all the weight off the tyres, and when the tyres aren't in contact with the tarmac, finally you lose grip, and that's basically what sent him round. And the unfortunate nature of that is late on in the warm-up, and he will be starting the race in less than 3 minutes of track time, essentially. So he's now got 2.5 hours in between warm-up and the race to stew on what he's just done wrong. Hopefully Lewis Williamson can explain via data and video what he did wrong, but as a driver, this is a nice session to wake yourself up, but not if you make a mistake like that.
And that's such an important part of the pro-am dynamic. You know, the pro driver isn't just the good for hire. They're not just there to go and drive the car quickly, but they're there to help set the car up, to coach the am driver, and sometimes to act as a bit of a cheerleader when things aren't quite going to plan.
Yeah, definitely. It's one of the more enjoyable parts as a pro in a pro-am bit is your driving's always fun. But then when you're working with an amateur who's normally a successful businessman, telling them how bad they are at things makes myself, ego-wise, feel great. But then you do get that school teacher feeling of them improving. At the end of it, they're sat there with a nice little smile on their face. We see the paddock motorsport with a lot of smoke out the rear left. Looks like it could just be a puncture to me, but the suspension sat low, isn't it? It looked like tyre wall was actually okay, which would indicate it's got air in the tyre. The front right is sat up high, so something in that rear left is not too happy. And obviously where we saw it picked up after the chicane, it could be those pesky little yellow curbs that aren't so little, causing a bit of an issue there. I hope for them that's not one of their race set of tyres. There's an allocation of tyres. Normally the teams will use the oldest set for warm-up just to not take any miles out of a race set, but they should have time to fix it. As you said, I think you've seen the suspension failure there, and it's all modular, a race car, so that could literally be changed within 10 to 15 minutes and be good to go. But Nice to happen now rather than start the race potentially.
Yes, that is true. It has always been the case at these morning warm-up sessions. You've nothing to gain from them, but you could very easily set yourself back going into the race later on. The race that's due to start at about 12:30, so they've got 2.5 hours to get that fixed. Sounds like hopefully they should be able to do it, but again, something that will no doubt play on the mind of Kelvin Fletcher, the driver who is in the car at the moment, and he will be hoping that whatever the issue is not replicated again in the race later on. You can see that left rear Pirelli tyre, I'm fairly sure, is inflated. It did look like it was a suspension collapse on the left rear corner, and into the Paddock Motorsport garage it goes. Paddock running 2 McLarens in British GT this year, one GT3 and one in GT4, and that's their GT3 example hitting some dramas. Right then, Joe, less than a minute to go in the warm-up session and an influx of activity at pit exit. So what's the reason for teams sending their cars out when they clearly don't have time to get around and start a flying lap?
Yeah, obviously the pit stop, having 3 of them in this race, is an important nature, but it's also quite technically quirky in terms of the minimum pit stop time. So to stop drivers doing stupid things and going out of their belts, we enforce a minimum time, so there's plenty of time to do everything safely. And that just means the teams have got to hone that down. You don't want to be too far over the pit stop time, but if you're a 1/10 of a second or anything under, it's a drive-through penalty, so you're going to lose 24 seconds by being greedy. So they'll just be honing their pit lane timers, and actually as we go on board with the Abacard, he obviously been told he's on TV. I hope that wasn't a rude gesticular. You see that blue box in the middle, that is the pit lane timer. So via GPS, that picks up when you drive into the pits and basically starts down a countdown procedure. So you can get it very finite, but it's difficult to get right to that 0.0 pit stop time.
Information coming in here from Bryn Lucas about the number 11 car. Yes, suspension failure, so thank you, Bryn. Bryn we'll be hearing from later on, our roving reporter here at Donington Park. He'll be out on the grid getting some interviews with drivers before the race and during it as well. And Bryn clearly down there in the pit lane gathering some information already for us, so thank you for that, Bryn. Sam Neary here in the Team AB Racing Mercedes, who was showing off for the cameras, I think it's fair to say, and then very nearly binned it at Redgate Corner. So
a bit of a dancing queen going on there in the Abacard, so
yes.
Hopefully in the race he keeps both hands on the wheel. I actually don't think the race director would be particularly happy with his showboating, but again we're getting a chance to see the steering wheel of this Mercedes compared to the 2Cs on board. You can see actually a little bit nervous on entry there under braking, which is never a nice feeling. If the car already wants to brake free before you've even turned in, you know it's going to be a difficult corner that's coming up.
Yeah, and of course some drivers might prefer that, but whether it's the quickest way around the circuit, I'm not so sure. There's the Century Motorsport BMW, the GT3 car, which looks like it's had a clean warm-up session, unlike at Alton Park at the season opener when Betty Chen ended in the barriers coming out of Druids Corner. Sam Neary, even on the way into the pit lane, extracting the absolute maximum from the Team AB Racing Mercedes. The checkered flag is out, by the way, and for what it's worth, it is the number 5 McLaren fastest in the session. That is the Greystone GT car, father and son pairing, Stuart and Lewis Proctor, which has gone fastest. Again, doesn't count for anything, but they'll be very happy to be at the top of the times. And just to further stroke your ego, Joe, I know you've been spending some time in their garage as well this weekend, so your words of wisdom paying off.
Exactly, finally. We're tough qualifying for them yesterday, in all honesty, and that time is only 0.4 of a second off Lewis's best time in qualifying on new tyres, and I know that was definitely a used set. So some teams do use this as a setup experiment, and I know we did some big setup changes on that number 5 car, so that warm-up session is so dynamic in what it's used for. Like you said, it's not worth anything points-wise, but it's going to give that car especially a lot of confidence. And I think that goes really for the top 4 when you look at the Audi and then the WPI Lambo in 3rd, and then the RJM McLaren of Kell in 4th. All of those times are very quick, considering they definitely wouldn't have been on new tyres, and those guys weren't at the sharp end of qualifying.
No, precisely. They are some pretty decent times there, as the Academy Mustang, I think, tried to get out on track, and Marco Signoretti was told by the marshals down there that the pit lane was closed. I spoke to Marco yesterday and said to him, obviously, you know, relatively inexperienced, not done a huge amount of racing before. He said, oh no, I've done quite a lot of racing actually. I said, oh yeah, what have you driven? Oh, I've raced Nissan Micras in Canada. Lots of transferable skills, I'm sure, from Nissan Micra racing to the GT4 Ford Mustang, but they're going quickly this weekend. Academy should be in contention for the win later on. In morning warm-up though, it is the Greystone GT McLaren fastest, the Proctors at the top of the times with a time just underneath 1 minute 26.7, with the Balf Motorsport Audi joint championship leading car second fastest, ahead of the WPI Lambo Lamborghini. Then it is the James Kellen, Simon Watts, Rocket RJM McLaren 4th, with Team ABBA Racing in 5th. Ewan Hankey and Mia Fluitt's 76 McLaren are 6th fastest, ahead of the Fox Motorsport McLaren in 7th. 2C's number 4 Mercedes, despite a spin, were 8th, ahead of Assetto Motorsports Bentley, and Century's BMW rounding out the top 10 in GT3. GT4, meanwhile, it was the Ginetta, Joe Wheeler, and Freddie Tomlinson fastest from Newbridge Motorsports, Darren Turner and Matt Topham, who were the winners in the Silverstone 500 a couple of weeks ago. So the morning warm-up session here at Donington Park taking place under bright blue skies, getting ever warmer, and the on-track action pretty hot as well, as the teams had their final opportunity to fettle car setups, to practice their driver changes and their pit stop protocols, and to make absolutely sure that everything is right with their GT cars ahead of the 3-hour fourth round of the championship later on. Not quite everything going to plan for the 76 McLaren. They struggled to get the door shut at the beginning of the session, whilst in GT4 it was the Assetto Motorsport Ginetta which set the fastest time. You can see there one of the GT3 cars they were sharing the track with was the Paddock Motorsport McLaren. They would have a fairly dramatic end to the session, as out on track so too, in fact, would the number 4 Mercedes, with James Cottingham having a loop down at the old hair, but he took too much curve on the inside line and rotated the Mercedes. No damage done, but that will no doubt be playing on his mind as we head into the 3 hours of racing later on today. Lamborghini circulating together. It was the Greystone GT McLaren which was fastest, the Paddock Motorsport car though, with damage to be fixed ahead of the 3 hours of racing later on this afternoon.